He joined the Union when he was 18, he joined the Social Democrats when he was 20, but 10 years ago he switched to the AfD. The immediate reason he did was because in 2016, he organized a protest against what he thought were too many refugees being settled in the northern part of Essen, his part of Essen, the poor part of Essen, where he said schools were already struggling, where affordable housing was already scarce, where food banks were already overwhelmed. He said North Essen couldn't cope. The SPD, the Social Democrats, banned the protest, so he left. The deeper reason he left, he said, was that he felt that the Social Democrats had betrayed its base, working class base, people like him. He didn't feel at home anymore. They had become the elite. And so for him, there is something going on that means that the center-right and the center-left have become practically indistinguishable. The choice is no longer left and right. The choice is kind of between the people and the elite. Germany is kind of a special case because the Social Democrats have not just mimicked center-right economic policies, they've actually governed with the center-right many times. They're in government with them now. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you are a Democrat. You are a member of the House of Representatives. Has the left betrayed the people? Has your party betrayed its base?
Yes, you know, what was the name of the individual from your story?
Guido.
Guido. It's funny that you asked this question because...
Is the mic working?
Is the microphone on? Okay, thank you. Thank you. It's funny that you asked this question about Guido because in many ways I relate to him. I share many aspects of his story. I was first elected when I was in 2018, and I was a waitress in New York City. I had no health insurance. I could not pay my rent, and I consistently saw a party that championed special interests, the elite, and a Democratic Party that was very much kind of telling working people that everything was fine when it in fact wasn't. And after I was elected, I remember I was crossing this threshold and there was this closed door meeting of many high-ranking Democratic Party officials, people that you see in the news and all of that. And they derided behind closed doors at that time, a long time ago. They derided many of the populist demands that I had run my campaign on. And I had defeated a 20-year Democratic incumbent that was part of Democratic Party leadership. And they said $15 minimum wage at that time, way too high, too severe. The idea of tuition-free public colleges and universities, too far, expanding health insurance and Medicare, too extreme. And these are all the things that I, as a waitress, had campaigned on and had been major pain points in my life. And then they said, we have to listen to working class people more. And I think that that encapsulates much of the betrayal that the working class in the United States had felt. But we have also come a long way since then. And we have a long way to go. The United States right now is experiencing a political pendulum, and depending, really, the party that is seen most as betraying the working class tends to be the governing party in this moment. Right now, that happens to be the Republican majority. But really, what we are seeing over the last 8 years, I think, has been a growing recognition that of those past errors that go back, that include military interventionism in the Iraq War, that include a recognition of NAFTA as a failed policy for many rural and working class communities. And now I think we are moving in this direction of increased recognition that we have to have a working class centered politics if we are going to succeed, and also if we are going to stave off the scourges of authoritarianism, which also provides political sirens, political siren calls to allure people into finding scapegoats to blame for rising economic inequality, both domestically and globally.
So when you run for president, are you going to impose a wealth tax or a billionaire's tax?
I don't think that I don't think that anyone, and that we don't have to wait for any one president to impose a wealth tax. I think that it needs to be done expeditiously.
And interestingly, when I wrote about wealth tax recently, and of course the big argument against this is always capital flight, the US is actually uniquely placed to do it because you guys tax on the basis of citizenship, so people can't flee, you know? And even if you change your citizenship, there's basically an exit tax because you have to pay a tax on unrealized capital gains. I learned this just recently. Manfred Weber, you are the president of the European People's Party, which is a group of conservative Christian democratic parties in the European Parliament, not far-right parties, but you have recently been voting occasionally with the far-right parties, breaching the famous firewall. Do you agree with J.D. Vance, who spoke here 1 year ago and told us all that this firewall is undemocratic? And if so, do you think that your party in Germany should actually be in coalition with the AfD instead of the Social Democrats?
Well, having J.D. Vance's speech of last year in mind, I 100% disagree with what he said there. And my party, the European People's Party, is a party of Schuman, of Adenauer, of de Gasperi, of those who founded the European Union. Afterwards, people like Václav Havel, of also Walesa from Poland, you know. So after the reunification, that is in a way the heritage of us as European People's Party. And to mention AfD in Germany, to mention nationalists in other countries, you know, that is totally the opposite what we stand for. My party, my predecessor as EPP party president is Donald Tusk in Poland, you know. He's fighting hard every day against Kaczynski, against Konfederacja, there to keep Poland in Europe and to be part of this European family. So that's our DNA. There's a clear red line. And I personally have defined it. For us, there is no cooperation possible with parties who do not follow the three pros, so pro-Europe, pro-Ukraine, pro-rule of law. Three key basic aspects which defines our DNA as EPP. But let me also be very clear when it is about the fight against populism. You mentioned a voice expressing the disappointment, the frustration, the concerns, the fears of citizens of this European Union. The basic thing is to win against populism is to give proper answer on their concerns and to take it serious. And this week in the European Parliament we voted on a safe third country concept. So to make our external borders against illegal migration, against the fight against the mafia there in the Mediterranean Sea, to make our borders to protect them. And the socialists were not capable, so center-left in Europe were not supporting this strict implementation of rules agreed by the overwhelming number of member states in the European Union, proposed by the Commission. So I don't speak about radical right extreme positions, I speak about the proposals from the European Commission, and the socialists were not ready to support this. So what can I say? I cannot continue to follow a quite left-leaning political approach on migration, which is obviously European-wide, feeding extremism and populism. That's why the basic thing is to answer the concerns and to give proper, serious, center-based answers.
What would you say to Guido when he says, look, the AfD is now the second largest party in Germany. In some ways, it's more aligned in some of its policies, particularly on immigration, which is why your bloc has voted with them on occasion, than the SPD, which is only on 16%. When he says you are ostracizing a significant part of the electorate by basically ruling out a coalition government with them, do you stick by that firewall, or do you think that actually in the foreseeable future, where the AfD is now, it will enter government sooner or later?
Again, firewall is there and exists. I personally, as EPP group leader, kicked out Viktor Orban of my party because enough was enough. And today Viktor Orban is far away from any kind of common sense on this. He's campaigning against the support for Ukraine, so he's far away from this. That's why our firewall is clear. We don't need any feedback on this. The key aspect is that we have to solve problems. Otherwise, the next European elections in 2029 will be a big festival for the right extreme, and that is to be avoided. So economic strengths, lowering a bureaucratic burden, creating single market, trade, Mercosur. These are the aspects to have economic growth. And my main question to Guido would be, do you really believe this bullshit the AfD is telling you? Do you really believe this? That without Mercosur we should have in Germany, with your working place as an industrial country who is benefiting much from export, do you really believe that without Mercosur we have better economic situation for you personally? Or on migration, sorry, have a look. We reduced now the number of illegal migrants by 80% together with Giorgia Meloni in the Mediterranean. I was also in contact with her and we delivered on this. So please see, if you vote for the right, center-right people, we solve your problems. That would be my message to Guido.
Mercosur is a good segue to Latin America. Diana Fernandez Molero, you are not a member of Javier Milei's party, but your party supports him, you support him. I always found it quite confusing that, you know, there's a groundswell of anti-elitist voters who vote into power people who then end up being very rich and mingle with the elites, like, you know, Trump and the sort of tech bro-oligarchy is a good example. It's confusing in a way. Milei has a slightly different approach, and I would love to hear from you what anarcho-capitalism, which is sort of his slogan, what that stands for, the kind of capitalism he's going for. Because on the face of it, superficially, it's a little bit reminiscent of Musk and Doge, you know, the chainsaw. So what does it mean? And how do you serve the people with the market?
Well, it's an interesting question what you made, because that's exactly, many times Milei got confused, no? Because anarcho-capitalism has nothing to do with what is going on in Argentina. We are having a capitalism of rules, because what we had before wasn't capitalism, was chronic capitalism. And that's a very, very important thing. So what we are trying to do, the government and the ones that support these reforms, we are creating a capitalism for the people. And that's the opposite of anarchy. It's capitalism of rules, but rules that benefit the people. And let me be precise about it. You have like populism that can be economic populism or political populism, Dornbusch or Mueller, basically. So if you go to economic populism, you have the recipe that many Latin American countries applied many times. That is, you know, short-term things that gives some relief in the short term, but end up being, you know, a tragedy for the future. It's like public expenditure, huge public expenditure, price control, sometimes wealth tax, and you end up the wealth goes away and you have just the tax and you don't have wealth anymore. That was something that Peronism did many times. So all these recipes then creates a cycle, no? Then you have this short-term relief, but then goes with inflation, shortage, then you have more poverty, and the cycle goes and goes. Then you have political populism, and that's different. That's a threat to democracy many times, because it's when you deny pluralism, when you say, okay, the popolo, del pueblo, the people against the others, the enemies of the people. And you also erode key institutions for democracy, free press, freedom of speech, court, judicial system, etc. But I think that Milei is none of them. I mean, maybe you cannot like his forms, his style, but it's very important when we discuss populism to distinguish in between style and substance. And I think that maybe the style, it's uncomfortable, but it doesn't make you a populist.
So when you say rules-based capitalism, I mean, I actually studied economics a long time ago. The perfect market doesn't exist, of course, but the idea is that you create a competitive environment. You do not allow for the concentration of wealth, which means antitrust and things like that. Regulation is very important. Is that something that your government stands for?
That's exactly what, I mean, the reforms that the government is doing is exactly that. The free trade agreements, more competition. Argentina is one of the closest economies in the world. We need more competition. So what I insist, capitalism is a bad word in Argentina, but what we had wasn't capitalism. It was capitalism for a few, for many that cannot compete with abroad, and so you can charge people extraordinary prices. A cell phone in Argentina was unaffordable. You have to go to the US to buy them. That's unfair for the people, and now people is seeing that it's working, because that's also interesting. That's why he got too much support from the people in the midterm election as well, after doing things that traditionally were not very popular. Any political advisor would have told you, oh, said that you're going to reduce the budget and that you're going to cut a lot of things. But these end up working for the people. So that's interesting. Free trade agreements, more competition, antitrust, all these kind of things.
So maybe you should give some advice to the US becoming a more competitive economy.
We are signing a free trade agreement with them as well. So
that's true. Peter Pavel, you are the Czech president, but you also were a very senior NATO general, the most senior one that the Czech Republic ever had. I want to start by asking you about your part of Europe, the sort of former communist part of Europe, and it's notable that a lot of the populist parties have done quite well. That there seems to be a sort of groundswell of support in that part of Europe. Certainly in Germany, the east of Germany, the former communist east, is the kind of heartland of the AfD. Why is that? And do you think, as somebody who has actually experienced a change in system in 1989, do you think that maybe capitalism was nicer, kinder, when it was still competing with communism?
Well, I'm afraid I will not offer you a thorough analysis, just my perception. But I believe that a number of people in former communist countries believed that with the change of the system, they will achieve all the benefits of capitalism while keeping all the benefits of socialism. That means getting richer, having access to travel, study, work abroad, having nice cars, plenty of goods in the shops, but no responsibility. And that created a lot of frustration, because when people realize that not everyone will get rich, and there will always be people who will be better off, and those who will not necessarily suffer, but will have living conditions more difficult than the others, then that frustration, if it is not properly addressed, it creates a lot of tension and frustration. And that was easily taken forward by those who believed that feeding on frustration of people, offering them short and nice solutions that they could never deliver, because they were not in power. They usually were in opposition, and they were only feeding on these insecurities, pointing to those who allegedly were behind these problems. They mostly referred to the government, to institutions like courts, to media. And of course, a number of people were prone to believe that their misery is because of lack of support and attention of the elites. I think it's very similar to any other country where the populism is a problem. But in general, I don't think that we should give a populism a label of some bad, because it depends how we define populism. I know a number of politicians who are proud of being called populists, because they believe that listening to frustration and problems of the people, transferring them into policies is actually the very sense of and the meaning of politics. But the problem starts when this populism is turned against the institutions that are there to protect democracy.
I want to sort of do one more quick round of questions about what this means for foreign and security policy, since we are at the Munich Security Conference, but then I will throw it up to open questions. So get your questions ready. And maybe I'll actually stay with you for a second. As with your head of former president of the military committee at NATO, very senior job, I wonder, are you worried about the fact that next year Bardella might be the president of France, maybe in 2029 Farage is the prime minister of the UK, and then the two nuclear powers in Europe are run by far-right nationalist populists, whatever you want to call them?
Well, first, I think we have to respect the will of people. If we live in democracies, we have to understand that not always there will be parties that we like. But at the same time, the experience is that when these people who used to be for a long time in a position on the critical side, once they are put in a position where they have the responsibility to deliver, then they suddenly understand the complexity of the situation, and they change a lot of their, let's say, extreme positions that they held before. I believe that the best protection is to have a good set of checks and balances, to have some counterweight against potential extreme moves. Another layer of protection could be vibrant civil society that can also do an excellent job, because most of those populist politicians are very sensitive to public opinion.
It's an interesting point that you raised there, because it's sort of this idea of democratic resilience in a way, which in a way, if we think holistically about security, you know, it's not just defense budgets, right? It's about people voting and people feeling safe, people feeling secure and happy and represented by their governments. And I wonder, to the extent that, maybe this is something I can throw to you, Alexandria, defense budgets have been rising everywhere. You guys have been spending a lot on defense for a long time, but a lot of governments now have very serious debt problems. And so there's a trade-off, right? I mean, if you spend more on defense, you spend less on other things. In France, for example, I was shocked to find out recently that the interest payment on debt annually is now bigger than the entire education sector. So you have a situation where all budgets are going down, only defense is going up. And it does raise the question, should we not invest in democratic resilience by providing good public services and spending money on that in order to actually protect our democracies internally as well as externally?
Yes, that's absolutely right. You know, I think one of the connections and relationships that is under-discussed, particularly in the security space, is the fact that I believe we're seeing an economy, across economy around the world, including in the United States, that extreme levels of income inequality lead to social instability and drives, in a sense, in authoritarianism, right-wing populism, and very dangerous domestic internal politics. And that is a direct outcome of not just income inequality, but the failure of democracies over decades to deliver. The failure to deliver higher wages, the failure to rein in corporations. You know, the point was just made about antitrust. In the United States, antitrust is such a foundational bedrock value, not just because the ascent of monopolies create the abuse of power in corporations and market power, but there is a level of market concentration and corporate consolidation where a massive company can get so big that its consolidated power can rival that of nation states. In democracies, we have elected leaders. And in massive corporations that then begin to consume the public sector, gobble up these spending, they start to call the shots. And we're starting to see this with some of the billionaire class throwing their weight around in domestic politics and in global politics as well. So it is of utmost urgent priority that we get our economic houses in order and deliver material gains for the working class, or else we will fall to a more isolated world governed by authoritarians that also do not deliver to working people.
And, you know, it's interesting. So this idea of, you know, in Europe, we are now spending more on defense budgets, but, you know, like I said, there are these trade-offs. I mean, we are in a situation where the group of pro-Russian countries within the EU is actually, it's still very small, but it's potentially growing. I don't know, I'd be curious to know whether the Czech Republic is halfway there. Certainly Viktor Orban and Robert Fico. You know, is the EU, in that sense, in terms of its foreign and security policy, still an entity that we can even think about, Manfred? Like, you know, what is the EU? And if Bardella and Farage, well, Farage is not inside the EU, but linked to it now in defense terms, possibly one day, you know, a junior coalition party that is the AfD, what is that EU in terms of foreign and security policy? does NATO still have a place in that case?
Well, first of all, about the role of the European Union. This week in Strasbourg in the European Parliament, we voted for the 90 billion euros for Ukraine. A clear message of full solidarity with the Ukrainian people. We stand on their side. We finance the pensions, we finance now the teachers, we finance the healthcare people. So that is what we are doing there. And I think that people know it. So that's what European Union together is doing. I would be happy if we would have used the frozen assets from the Russians to pay for this, but okay, now we are on a way at least to have the money provided. So clear message. But when we speak about populism in regard to the defense and security dimension, I think first step is to deliver on the main concern about just society, about economic growth, about migration, to have control about this. But the second thing of answering populism is to show brave leadership and not following always public opinion. You know, when the German Chancellor Kohl invented the euro to make Europe strong economically, one bloc, which is now the second biggest currency in global level with the euro, it was not popular at all to give up on the German D-mark in Germany. Not at all. But he did it. He stood in front of people. And that were great times for my party, for CDU-CSU. Because people saw leaders who were convinced about an idea and fought for it and didn't give up the public discourse space for the populism. They dominated the discourse with their ideas for the future. And that is what we are probably lacking today. That's why I'm so ambitious to say I would love to have one president of the European Union, probably directly elected by the people of Europe on the long run. Why not? To have one person capable to be on the same level as Trump and Xi and Putin. And a second idea, I am in favor of really unifying our defense pillars in the European Union. On the long run, also a European army, where I would say we are spending so much money now, 6.5 trillion euros in the next 10 years for defense, but we have not the same capabilities than the Americans have. And that's why I know it's a long project, but again, Euro, or 7 years after the Second World War, when Adenauer said we have to make peace with France, it was also mission impossible 7 years after the horrible war of the Second World War. So we have to be ambitious again. And that are the two pillars of fight against populism, delivering on content about the concerns, but also showing brave leadership in historic moments.
I hope we can go deeper in that actually in the Q&A. I'm going to ask one final question, Diana, and then throw it open to you guys, because I'm curious. I mean, we're talking about foreign policy here, and foreign policy of populist presidents, for example. I mean, looking at the pivot of President Trump to the Western Hemisphere, which has been very aggressive to say the least. Argentina has been a beneficiary, of course. How do you feel? I mean, I worked and traveled a little bit in South America, and I remember the Yankees were not super popular. This is a long time ago. How do you feel about being considered a sphere of influence and a backyard of America?
Well, I think that this new involvement of the U.S. in Latin America is great news for Latin America because, I mean, it makes, for instance, Europe make harder efforts in order to sign the Mercosur European agreement. That's great news. But also...
We need the push, I have to say. We need the kick.
Well, you need still to go with it. But the thing is that it's better options for Argentina and for Latin America, of course, but more interested in the region. And one thing, I don't think it's just completely new, because I remember, for instance, Blinken coming to Argentina when Milei was elected. He went to the Pink House, the Casa Rosada, and stayed there, so showing some kind of, a new treatment to Latin America, because it's very important in this new era, because the United States is also looking for resilience in trade, etc. So I think it's great news, because when we align in terms of convergence of interest, I think it's great news for Argentina, because we have more trade, more investment, which has signed this new trade agreement with the U.S. Hopefully we're going to ratify in Congress soon. And that provides more opportunities for the Argentinian people. So how can one be against that? So I think that having this new interest of the U.S. in the region is super, super favorable, because it's filling a vacuum that was filled before by other authoritarian powers that many times didn't like market economy nor democracy. So it's great news.
Although the sort of naked grab for oil in Venezuela?
Well, but I mean, I live with Venezuelan people in my country because there are a lot of exiles in Argentina living there, and I can tell you that they were really, really happy because sovereignty for them was not the oil. I mean, the fact that they have to flee away their countries, leaving their families, leaving all their country to live in another countries. I mean, for them, they were happy. They were. I mean, it was.
Even though Machado was not made president, or was not allowed to return as president.
Yeah, because it returns hope, because what was going on was intolerable. I mean, and they try everything possible. They try everything that was possible. They try elections. They go and knock the door to multilateral organizations, but nothing happened. There was a lot of diagnosis, but nothing happened in real concrete results. So that's something that we need to take into account, because democracy also fails, or populists also come when this kind of organization fails. So we need these organizations to work again and to be more responsive to the needs, especially of the people.
With this, many questions. Can I, in a panel with 3 women, let me start with a woman, and then I'll go to the gentleman over there. Keep your questions short. We don't have much time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Elena Lazaro. I'm the Director General of the Hellenic Foundation for European Foreign Policy in Athens, Greece. Thank you. I wanted to ask you, there's a narrative going on right now which goes like this, that you can increase defense spending but also implement social equality policies at the same time, and the idea would be, decentralize that industry, go for dual use, and boost skills, upskill, reskill. And I wanted to ask, do you think that is the truth? Is it feasible, or is it sort of a populist line? And I was thinking of Representative Ocasio-Cortez and Member of Parliament, European Parliament, Manfred Weber, but also Argentina and the Czech Republic have very robust defense industries, so maybe it's for all of them. Thank you.
Can we maybe take one more question, and then, or maybe we do 3, and then you guys can sort of do a round of answers. Yes, run here, sorry. And then I'll go take one from behind.
I'm Liam Byrne. I'm the UK Labour Chair of the Business and Trade Committee in the House of Commons, but full disclosure, I have a book on why populists are winning and how to beat them out in March. So I just want to ask about the core politics of how we beat them, right? Because this is a security threat. Authoritarian populists offer appeasement abroad, autocracy at home, and avarice everywhere. It's a universal formula. But what we find when we study their rhetoric is that they always argue about national renewal against civilizational decline, nostalgia and a hunger for something lost, and a sense of emergency, crisis and struggle, which is why you need a strongman leader. And it feels to me that the core politics required to defeat them is you have got to promise renewal, but that's about de-rigging the marketplace. You've got to be optimistic and rebuild the opportunity economy, and not a strongman leader that divides and rules. You've got to rebuild a strong society and the social capital that goes with it. But I'd be interested in people's views on the core politics required to win.
Okay, one final question, then we'll have a round of answers.
I'm Ava Federley from New York City, Straight Arrow News. Congresswoman, they're saying that there's more American delegates here than there have ever been at the Munich Security Conference. Why do you think it's important that you're here, against the wrecking ball politics of Trump? But, why is it important that you're here representing the U.S.?
Also, I'm so glad you made it. Who paid for your flight?
We did.
Should we just you start, and then we just take a quick fire round of answers?
Sure. I'll start last to first. I think this is a moment where we are seeing our presidential administration tear apart the transatlantic partnership, rip up every democratic norm, and really calling into question, as was mentioned by David Carney at the World Economic Forum, the rules-based order that we have, or question mark, do we have? And so I think one of the reasons why, not just myself, but many of our colleagues here, in fact, many Democrats that are here as well, is because we want to tell a larger story, that what is happening is indeed very grave. And we are in a new era, domestically and globally. There have been many leaders who've said we will go back. And I think we have to recognize that we are in a new day and in a new time. But that does not mean that the majority of Americans are ready to walk away from a rules-based order and that we're ready to walk away from our commitment to democracy. I think what we identify is that in a rules-based order, hypocrisy is vulnerability. And so I think what we are seeking is a return to a rules-based order that eliminates the hypocrisies around when too often in the West we look the other way for inconvenient populations to act out these paradoxes, whether it is, you know, kidnapping a foreign head of state, whether it is threatening our allies to colonize Greenland, whether it is looking the other way in a genocide. Hypocrisies are vulnerabilities, and they threaten democracies globally. And so I think many of us are here to say, we are here and we are ready for the next chapter, not to have the world turn to isolation, but to deepen our partnership on greater and increased commitment to integrity to our values.
Just a 20-second follow-up, really, just quick. Are there any particular institutions that a democratic administration would want to save? Like your voters, is it NATO? Is it the climate accord? Is it the Iran nuclear? Are there some things where, just give me a lily pad.
Well, you know, first and foremost, I think we need to revisit our commitments to international aid. Not just USAID, but the dozens of global compacts that this current Secretary of State and President Trump have withdrawn from. They are looking to withdraw the United States from the entire world so that we can turn into an age of authoritarians that can carve out the world where Donald Trump can command the Western Hemisphere and Latin America as his personal sandbox, where Putin can saber rattle around Europe and try to bully around our own allies there, and for essentially authoritarians to have their own geographic domains. And it actually is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, it is our global alliances that can be a hard stop against authoritarian consolidation of power, particularly in the installation of regional puppet governments.
Amazing. Manfred, should we just take it this way and then Dinah gets the last word?
Yeah, you know, I'm on this question about social versus defense investments. You know, you can spend only €1 once time, so you can only do it once. That's why at the end we have to prioritize things. And having the German budget in mind, I think that's different to the American situation, but we have a healthcare system, we have a venture system, we have everything in a way from a social model perfectly organized, but we spend 42% of our GDP for social issues. And that's why I don't think, and that's the problem with the socialists of today in Germany, they cannot anymore win votes with adding social benefits, you know, spending more money, giving you this property, this idea. We have to be in another way creative. We have to find other ways to guarantee social market economy, justice inside of a society without offering always more money and having demographic development in mind. All these problems, there are substantial changes necessary, and that will be hard to win this against populists, because that will reorganize these kind of things. But one aspect was not mentioned until now, and that is the basic thing, how we communicate inside of a society. And that is about social media. Because the biggest problem I see in democracies, in future democracies, is that we don't share anymore the same fact base. You can have a socialist offer, a green offer, an EPP offer, a liberal offer for solving a problem, but if you don't agree anymore on the facts, on the problem in a society, then you cannot have any more a public discourse about the way you do it. And that is a problem of fake news in social media from all different forms, left and right and center. Everybody's creating his bubble, his own identity. And the second problem I see there is that in social media, in our way of communication, the key core principle of democracy, and that is compromise, does not exist anymore. You only have black and white being retweeted. The boring thing of a Manfred Weber, of a Christian Democrat is to make a compromise is not retweeted because it's already, you gave up on what you promised to me because you did the compromise.
Why aren't you guys pushing harder for the algorithms in these tech companies? Why aren't you regulating them? Why don't you dare to stand up to them?
We did a DSA heavily challenged by Vance last year here in this speech. In his speech here, we stick to this and we want to guarantee that this modern form of communication is democracy friendly. Today, I would say, it's not in line with our principle of democracy, this form of communication.
Nobody's pushing very hard to regulate it. I mean, this is also a failure of democracy, right? I need to be fast and ruthless here. Just a minute each. Sorry.
Okay. I will first address the question from Greece. In case of Czech Republic, it's slightly easier because we are one of the most industrialized countries in Europe with a great tradition in defense industry. So if I'm cynical, I would say the stronger defense industry, the more taxes in Czech Republic, the more money for social benefits, for social policies. So it's not in a contradiction. Unfortunately, current government is not using that opportunity because EU has come with a provision that whatever is spent on defense above 2%, that doesn't count into the deficit, which in fact encourages the government to increase defense spending without cutting social benefits. I think this is the way, at least for some time to go in both ways.
Jana, no pressure. This is the final word. Make it good.
Okay. No, well, just one thing that you said that rings a bell to me. Regulation. You said regulation. Be careful with regulation because it's also, could be also harmful. And maybe we don't know how to regulate. Maybe we regulate inappropriately. It's something that in Argentina we see every time, especially in Congress, because there's also a tendency now for politicians to get the attention of the people to pass new laws and new regulation in order to become famous. And then, for instance, we have a regulation on price controls in housing, and it really didn't work. Imagine if we were trying to regulate AI without the whole new things that are going on. So let's be very, very careful about regulation and when to regulate and when not to regulate. But of course, going to the thing that the defense and how you allocate expendication. In Argentina, we had a large amount of money to social benefits, and it didn't work. So it does not alone fight inequality or fight the real grievances of the voters. So I think that we need to rethink also that just expenditure doesn't change life. We need also, you need to expend more, but you need to expend correctly, and you need transparency, and you also need to see whether this policy works or not. And you need to combine those because also security is really important, and you need a perfect combination.
I think we haven't solved the problem, but I think you will agree that this was a very rich discussion with really a star panel. So thank you all very much. Thank you. That was really very good. You were